There are moments in modern history when the world holds its breath, when the decisions made in Washington, in Tehran, and on the decks of American warships rippling through the Persian Gulf will echo for decades to come. This is one of those moments. Right now, as you watch this, the United States military is engaged in an active, ongoing military campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran, a campaign with a name that signals its ambitions, Operation Epic Fury. And as of this broadcast, that operation has entered its fifth week with no clear end in sight and with stakes that extend far beyond the borders of the Middle East. What began as a targeted military campaign has now escalated into something far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more consequential than many Americans fully appreciate. We are talking about potential ground operations on Iranian soil, the possible seizure of nuclear material, ballistic missile attacks against a United States ally, Hezbollah rockets crossing international borders, Houthi missile strikes complicating an already volatile theater, and diplomatic negotiations happening simultaneously with active bombing campaigns. This is not a drill. This is not a proxy conflict playing out on the margins of American foreign policy. This is the United States of America under President Donald Trump, in a direct and declared military confrontation with one of the most heavily armed and ideologically committed adversarial regimes on the planet. The implications are staggering. The risks are real, and the next few days, weeks, and potentially months will determine not only the future of the Iranian nuclear program, but the broader stability of the entire Middle East, the security of American allies, the confidence of American adversaries watching from Moscow and Beijing, and the political future of a president who has staked enormous personal and national credibility on the outcome of this operation. Welcome to the broadcast. Here is everything you need to know. The headline this morning is stark and unambiguous. Operation Epic Fury, the United States military campaign targeting the Islamic Republic of Iran, has entered its fifth consecutive week of active operations. President Donald Trump, in a social media post that set the tone for the day, described it simply and powerfully, writing that it has been a big day in Iran, that many targets have been taken out by the American military, which he called the finest in the world. And closing with a message of God bless to the troops engaged in combat. Meanwhile, reports emerging from multiple military and intelligence sources indicate that the president is now actively considering a limited ground operation inside Iranian territory. This consideration comes directly alongside the arrival of the USS Tripoli, an American amphibious assault ship to the region, a vessel that carries United States Marines and is specifically designed to project ground combat power from sea to shore. The situation is evolving rapidly and the stakes could not be higher. To fully understand where we are today, it is essential to walk through the detailed picture that is emerging from the front lines of this conflict, from the halls of American diplomacy, and from the streets of Israeli cities now under renewed attack. Fox News correspondent Trey Yingst reported this morning from his position tracking the conflict that Iranian forces have continued launching ballistic missile attacks against Israel, with strikes targeting a chemical plant located outside Beersheba, one of Israel's major southern cities. This is not a minor development. Ballistic missile attacks on civilian and industrial infrastructure represent an escalation that directly endangers Israeli civilian lives and tests the capacity of Israel's already heavily strained air defense systems. At the same time, Hezbollah, the Lebanese militant organization backed and funded by Tehran, launched rockets across the northern border into Israel just within the hours prior to this morning's broadcast. One fragment from that rocket barrage struck the city of Haifa, Israel's third largest city, and a major port and industrial hub. The fact that Hezbollah continues to operate even as Iran faces American military pressure speaks directly to the depth and resilience of the Iranian proxy network that has been built over decades, a network that, even as its patron state absorbs punishing airstrikes, continues to project violence and terror against American allies. When asked directly by reporters whether he was considering putting boots on the ground inside Iran, President Trump did not issue a denial. Instead, he responded with calculated ambiguity, stating that the United States has lots of alternatives and a tremendous number of ships in the region, and adding significantly that the campaign is running ahead of schedule with Iran. That phrase, ahead of schedule, carries enormous weight. It suggests that the military campaign is achieving its objectives faster than anticipated, which simultaneously increases the pressure on Tehran and opens new strategic options for Washington, including the possibility of a ground assault to physically seize nuclear material before Iran can move or destroy it. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has stated publicly that the United States believes it can achieve its core objectives without putting troops on the ground. But the military positioning tells a different story, or at least a more complicated one. The arrival of the USS Tripoli is not an accident. Amphibious assault ships of that class are not sent to a theater of war as decoration. They are sent when ground options are being seriously considered and pre-positioned assets are needed to make those options real. The presence of the Tripoli in the region is, in the words of military analysts, a physical manifestation of optionality. And optionality, as we will explore in a moment, is at the very heart of President Trump's strategic approach to this confrontation. To understand why this moment carries such profound historical weight, we must go back not just days or weeks, but years and decades to understand the long, tangled, and often tragic history of American engagement with Iran, with nuclear non-proliferation, and with the broader challenge of military intervention in the Middle East. The Islamic Republic of Iran has been, since its founding in 1979, one of the most persistent and complex adversaries in the American foreign policy landscape. From the hostage crisis that defined the Carter presidency, to the Iran-Contra affair that shadowed the Reagan administration, to the proxy wars fought through Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthi movement in Yemen, Iran has consistently pursued a strategy of asymmetric confrontation, never facing the United States directly in open conventional warfare, but always probing, testing, and bleeding American power through proxies, terrorism, and strategic patience. The nuclear question has been at the center of this confrontation for more than 2 decades. In 2002, the existence of Iran's secret nuclear enrichment facilities was publicly revealed, triggering a cascade of international responses that included United Nations sanctions, covert sabotage operations, most notably the Stuxnet cyber attack widely attributed to the United States and Israel, and years of grinding diplomatic negotiations. The Obama administration's signature achievement on this front was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, known as the JCPOA, or the Iran Nuclear Deal, signed in 2015. That agreement imposed strict limits on Iranian uranium enrichment and provided for international inspections in exchange for significant sanctions relief. President Trump, during his first term, withdrew the United States from that agreement in 2018, calling it the worst deal ever negotiated, and reimposed sweeping economic sanctions on Tehran. Iran, in turn, began progressively expanding its nuclear program, ultimately reaching levels of uranium enrichment that international inspectors confirmed were approaching weapons-grade concentrations. By the time Operation Epic Fury was launched, Iran had enriched enough uranium to potentially produce multiple nuclear weapons. Not yet a weapon itself, but dangerously close to what nuclear experts call the breakout threshold, the point at which a nation can quickly convert enriched material into an actual warhead. This context is what makes the current military campaign so historically significant. For the first time, the United States is not merely threatening military action against Iran's nuclear program, it is actively executing it, with daily airstrikes targeting nuclear development facilities, and with a ground operation now being openly contemplated to physically remove enriched uranium from Iranian soil. The historical precedents here are limited but instructive. In 1981, Israel conducted Operation Opera, a surprise airstrike that destroyed Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor before it became operational. In 2007, Israel struck a suspected nuclear facility in Syria, Both operations were conducted in secrecy and completed in a single day. What the United States is now undertaking is categorically different in scale, duration, and ambition. Operation Epic Fury is not a one-day surgical strike. It is a sustained, multi-week military campaign targeting a nation with a sophisticated military, a large population, extensive proxy networks, and a deeply ideological government that views its own survival as synonymous with resistance to American power. The key players in this unfolding drama are as varied as the conflict itself. At the center is President Donald Trump, now in his second term, who has embraced this confrontation as a defining test of American strength and resolve. Trump has made no secret of his belief that the Obama-era nuclear deal was a historic mistake and that diplomacy alone cannot neutralize the Iranian nuclear threat. His approach, combining devastating military strikes with simultaneous diplomatic engagement, reflects a philosophy of using maximum pressure and maximum optionality to force adversaries into unfavorable negotiating positions. The president's comment that negotiations with Iran are going well, that they are getting a lot of what they should have given up a long time ago, signals that he views the military campaign not as an end in itself, but as a lever to extract concessions that no previous administration achieved through diplomacy alone. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is the diplomatic face of this operation, and his public statements reflect a careful effort to preserve international credibility and coalition support while giving the military campaign room to operate. Rubio's insistence that objectives can be achieved without ground troops is designed in part to reassure nervous allies in Europe and the Gulf who fear a broader regional war, while simultaneously leaving the ground option alive as a negotiating tool. Military analyst and Everyday Warrior podcast host Mike Sarraille provided essential context this morning, describing Trump's approach as creating leverage through optionality. His analysis deserves careful consideration. Sarraille noted that the deployment of Marines via the USS Tripoli sends a clear and unmistakable message to Iranian leadership, not of an impending full-scale invasion, but of a capacity and willingness to execute a limited targeted ground operation with specific and achievable objectives. The multi-dimensional impact of Operation Epic Fury extends far beyond the immediate military theater, touching virtually every major dimension of American and global life. On the political front, the operation represents a massive test of President Trump's foreign policy doctrine and a moment that could define his second term as decisively as Iraq defined George W. Bush's presidency. Congressional dynamics are already shifting, with members of both parties grappling with the question of war powers, specifically whether the president has the constitutional authority to conduct this operation without a formal congressional authorization for the use of military force. That debate, while currently playing out largely behind closed doors, could erupt into a major public confrontation if the operation expands significantly or if American casualties begin to mount. Economically, the stakes are enormous. Iran sits astride the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes on any given day. Iranian threats to close that strait or to allow Houthi forces in Yemen to attack shipping have already contributed to significant volatility in global oil markets. Against this backdrop, the announcement that Iran has agreed to allow 20 additional oil tankers to transit the Strait of Hormuz is a significant, if limited, signal. It suggests that even as Iranian officials issue fire-breathing public threats about setting American forces ablaze, behind the scenes there is a pragmatic calculation being made about economic survival and the costs of full escalation. Analyst Mike Sarraille characterized this concession as being fundamentally about the regime's survival, a recognition that full economic strangulation, combined with ongoing military strikes, threatens the stability of the Islamic Republic itself. Socially and humanistically, the conflict is already producing real human consequences on multiple fronts. Israeli civilians in cities from Beersheba in the south to Haifa in the north are living under active missile and rocket attack. The psychological toll of sustained missile bombardment on civilian populations is immense and well documented from previous conflicts. The prospect of a prolonged campaign raises serious questions about displacement, economic disruption, and the long-term psychological health of communities caught in the crossfire of a conflict they did not start and cannot control. The legal and constitutional questions surrounding Operation Epic Fury are significant and largely unresolved. Under the War Powers Resolution of 1973, a president is required to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing American forces to hostilities and is prohibited from maintaining those forces in conflict for more than 60 days without congressional authorization. The operation is now in its 5th week, approaching the 35th day, meaning the 60-day clock is running, and the administration will soon face formal legal obligations to either seek congressional approval or begin withdrawing forces. Legal scholars are watching this closely, and the question of whether a ground operation in Iran would require specific congressional authorization is one that could end up before the federal courts. Internationally, the reverberations are being felt from Moscow to Beijing to Riyadh to Brussels. America's European allies, who largely oppose the Trump administration's withdrawal from the JCPOA in 2018, are now watching with a mixture of alarm and grudging acknowledgement that the diplomatic-only approach to Iran's nuclear ambitions had reached its limits. Gulf Arab states, including Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which have long lived under the shadow of Iranian power, are watching with considerable interest and, in some quarters, quiet satisfaction. China and Russia, who have both cultivated relationships with Tehran and who benefit geopolitically from any distraction that draws American military attention away from the Indo-Pacific and Eastern Europe, are monitoring the situation with strategic calculation. An extended American military commitment in the Middle East is precisely the kind of overextension that both Moscow and Beijing have long sought to engineer. Military and political analysts observing this situation note several dimensions of particular significance. The strategic logic described by Mike Sorelli, that Trump is deliberately creating confusion and uncertainty in Iranian minds about American intentions, reflects a well-documented negotiating strategy of unpredictability that the president has employed throughout his political career. By simultaneously bombing Iran and negotiating with Iran, by threatening ground troops while Secretary Rubio suggests they may not be necessary, the administration is denying Iranian leadership the ability to make clean, confident calculations about American red lines. An Iranian spokesperson's complaint that Trump threatens a warning and retreats, that he talks about negotiation and then decides to continue the war hours later, is, from a certain analytical perspective, not a criticism, but a confirmation that the strategy is working exactly as intended. Public sentiment in the United States, based on available polling and media landscape analysis, reflects the complexity of the situation. Americans broadly support preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. That has been a consistent finding in national security polling for well over a decade. However, support for ground troops and for an extended military commitment is considerably more fragile, particularly in the aftermath of the 2-decade-long conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan that cost thousands of American lives and trillions of dollars. The ghost of Iraq 2003 hangs heavily over this debate, and both the administration and its military advisors have been at pains to distinguish the current operation from that catastrophic precedent. Sorelli was explicit on this point, stating directly that this is not a 2003 Iraq Road to Tehran march. It is a limited objective operation focused on specific targets, including the potential seizure of nuclear infrastructure or enriched nuclear material. This moment does not exist in isolation. It fits into a larger pattern of escalating confrontation that has been building for months. Over the past 30 to 60 days, the strategic environment in the Middle East has been fundamentally transformed. Iranian-backed Houthi forces in Yemen have demonstrated a persistent and dangerous willingness to attack international shipping in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, disrupting global supply chains and forcing commercial vessels onto longer, more expensive alternative routes. That broader campaign of maritime disruption is intimately connected to the current conflict, with Houthi missile strikes, two of which were launched against targets in the region just in the hours before this morning's broadcast, representing an ongoing second front that stretches American and allied military resources. The Wall Street Journal has published a detailed analysis of the extraordinary logistical challenges associated with physically extracting enriched uranium from Iranian nuclear facilities, concluding that such an operation would take anywhere from days to weeks to complete. This timeline matters enormously for military planning. A raid that must be sustained for days or weeks requires not just the initial assault force, but a sustained logistics chain, air superiority over the target area, protection against Iranian counterattacks, and a credible plan for extracting both personnel and material under fire. Sorelli acknowledged the immense complexity of such an operation while noting that American forces, specifically Marines and elements of the Army's 82nd Airborne Division, which specializes in rapid deployment operations, have the training and capability to execute exactly this kind of limited, high-risk seizure operation. The risks, he acknowledged, are real and significant, but the capability exists. Looking ahead, there are several specific developments to watch with particular attention in the coming days and weeks. The most immediate and consequential is whether President Trump will authorize a ground operation in Iran. The positioning of the USS Tripoli, the president's conspicuously non-denying answer when asked about boots on the ground, and the public discussion of seizing nuclear material all suggest that this decision may come sooner than many observers expect. A second major development to watch is the status of diplomatic negotiations. The president's characterization of those negotiations as going well and producing concessions that Iran should have made a long time ago suggests real progress is being made behind closed doors. But the history of negotiations with Tehran counsels caution about overinterpreting any single positive signal. Congress will also be an increasingly important factor as the 60-day war powers clock continues to tick. The administration will either need to seek formal authorization for the operation or find legal arguments for why such authorization is not required. That debate could become a major political battleground, particularly if the ground operation moves forward. On the battlefield itself, the critical question is whether sustained American airstrikes are successfully degrading Iran's nuclear capabilities in a durable way, or whether, as some analysts warn, the Iranians are using the negotiations as cover to move and disperse their most critical assets before any potential ground operation can seize them. And on the broader regional front, the continued operation of Hezbollah and the Houthis raises the question of whether this conflict will remain primarily between the United States and Iran, or whether it will metastasize into a wider regional war involving multiple fronts simultaneously. As we bring this broadcast to a close, it is worth pausing to fully absorb the magnitude of what we are witnessing in real time. Operation Epic Fury, now in its fifth week, represents the most significant direct American military confrontation with Iran in the 46-year history of the Islamic Republic. The United States is conducting sustained airstrikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, while simultaneously negotiating with Tehran, considering a ground operation to seize enriched uranium, managing a proxy war being fought through Hezbollah rockets over Israeli cities, and Houthi missiles launched against American allies, and doing all of this while the global economy watches oil markets with nervous attention. President Trump has staked enormous personal, political, and national credibility on the proposition that his approach, maximum pressure combined with strategic ambiguity and an iron military fist, can achieve what 46 years of diplomacy, sanctions, covert operations, and previous military threats could not: a durable, verifiable end to the Iranian nuclear weapons program. Whether he succeeds or fails, whether this operation ends in a historic diplomatic achievement or in a broader regional catastrophe, will depend on decisions being made right now in the Situation Room, in the Iranian parliament, on the deck of the USS Tripoli, and in the skies over Iran. This story is far from over. The world is watching. American credibility, Middle Eastern stability, and the future of nuclear non-proliferation hang in the balance. Stay informed, stay engaged, and we will continue to bring you every development as it unfolds. This has been your comprehensive briefing on Operation Epic Fury and the escalating American military campaign against Iran. Thank you for watching.